The annual summit aboard the Celestial Conclave Station, Aurora, was proceeding with its usual measured formality. Ambassador Maris Kale observed the proceedings from her seat in the Chrythari delegation, her large amber eyes scanning the circular chamber where representatives from all 6 member species had gathered. The station's neutral territory had been designed to accommodate the biological needs of each race: the methane-breathing Valeri, the aquatic chambers for the Nidrani, and the high-gravity sections for her own people. 20 years had passed since humans had been admitted to the conclave. 20 years of measured diplomacy, careful trade agreements, and gradual integration. The humans had been categorized as Deathworlders species that evolved on high-gravity, high-radiation planets with extreme seasonal variations and aggressive fauna. Such origins typically produced militaristic conquest-driven species, yet the humans had proven themselves remarkably restrained. Their diplomatic corps was professional, their trade practices fair, and their limited defensive fleet maintained strict orbit patterns around their colonial systems. The Avarini delegation was speaking now, their spindle-like frames swaying as they outlined proposals for a new cultural exchange program. Maris suppressed a yawn. The Avarini were brilliant philosophers, but terribly long-winded. Her attention drifted to the human contingent. General Connor Reed sat rigid in his formal black uniform, adorned with just enough medals to denote his status, without appearing ostentatious. Unlike most military leaders from other species, Reed rarely spoke during these sessions. He merely watched those dark eyes, missing nothing while Ambassador Torres handled the diplomatic exchanges. General Reed fascinated Maris. There was something in his demeanor, a coiled tension perhaps that seemed at odds with humanity's peaceful integration. She had reviewed his public service record, of course. Former commander of Earth's Third Fleet, decorated during some border skirmish in a system called Proxima Centauri, now serving as military liaison to the conclave. The file contained little else of substance. The chamber's lighting dimmed, suddenly, pulling Maris from her thoughts. Murmurs rippled through the delegates as the conclave moderator, a Nidrani, whose translucent body pulsed with bioluminescent concern, activated the central communication array. "We are receiving an emergency transmission," the moderator announced, voice modulator conveying urgency. "Priority Alpha channel from Chrythar Prime." Maris straightened. Her homeworld never initiated emergency communications during summit sessions. Protocol strictly forbade it, except in the most dire circumstances. The holographic display sputtered to life, but instead of the expected formal greeting from the Chrythari Council, the image showed chaos. Buildings crumbled in the background. Smoke obscured much of the capital city's distinctive spiral towers. The transmission stabilized on the face of First Minister Talar, his scales dull with dust and what appeared to be blood. "Conclave, please." The transmission crackled with interference. "We are under attack. Drakari warships breached our orbital defenses without warning. The capital, falling." An explosion rocked the minister's position, and the image tilted wildly. "They've disabled our long-range communications. This message. Boost from emergency transmitter." Maris rose from her seat, heart hammering. "First Minister, what is your status? Where is the planetary guard?" Talar's image stabilized briefly. "Ambassador Kale, thank the stars." The guard was overwhelmed. "Our defense grid. Incompatible with Drakari weapon signatures. They're using something new, cutting through shields like they don't exist." His voice lowered. "The death toll. Civilians. We need immediate assistance." The transmission deteriorated further, pixels fragmenting, as Talar looked over his shoulder. "They're coming. Please. Invoke Article 7 of the Mutual Defense Accord. We cannot stand alone against..." The feed cut to static. The chamber erupted into voices, each delegation conferring frantically among themselves. The moderator pulsed a bright blue, calling for order. Maris found herself gripping the polished stone of her delegation's table. The Chrythari were not warriors. Their civilization valued art, philosophy, and scientific advancement. Their defensive capabilities were primarily designed to ward off asteroid collisions and the occasional pirate vessel, not a full-scale invasion. The Drakari. She had heard rumors of their expansion beyond the Outer Rim systems, but nothing concrete had reached the Conclave. Not officially. The nomadic species had always been troublesome, raiding isolated colonies and disrupting trade routes. But this was unprecedented aggression. We must establish facts before proceeding. The Averini delegation head said, his reedy voice cutting through the chaos. Verification protocols must be followed. The transmission could be falsified. Falsified! Maris whirled on him, scales flaring with indignation. That was First Minister Talar. My people are dying while you debate protocols. The moderator's appendages waved for calm. Ambassador Kale speaks with emotion but raises a valid concern. If the Krathari homeworld has indeed fallen under attack, our mutual defense accord requires action. What form of action? The Volari representative's translated voice hissed through the chamber. The Conclave maintains peacekeeping vessels, not warships. If the Drakari have developed shield-penetrating weapons, our forces would be equally vulnerable. A heavy silence fell over the chamber as delegates exchanged uneasy glances. The Conclave had prospered through diplomacy and trade, not military might. Each member maintained modest defense forces for their individual territories, but nothing capable of repelling a determined invasion force. Maris felt desperation clawing at her throat. We must do something. Millions of my people. The Mutual Defense Accord has provisions for this exact scenario. The voice was deep, authoritative, and unmistakably human. General Reed had risen from his seat, hands clasped behind his back, as all eyes turned toward him. Article 7 permits any member to request direct military intervention from another signatory power if their sovereignty is threatened, and the Conclave's peacekeeping forces are deemed insufficient. Reed's expression remained neutral, but his eyes locked with Maris's across the chamber. Earth is prepared to render assistance to the Krathari people, effective immediately should the Conclave grant formal consensus. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The human military contingent was respected, but small, a token force of perhaps 20 vessels spread across their territory. How could they possibly hope to challenge a Drakari invasion fleet that had already overwhelmed Krathari defenses? Generous but insufficient, said the Averini delegate dismissively. The human fleet is barely adequate to patrol their own systems. We need a diplomatic solution before committing to military action that would surely fail. Reed's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I assure you, Earth's response would be appropriate to the threat. The moderator's bioluminescence pulsed thoughtfully. The accord requires a formal vote for non-conclave military forces to enter member space, even for defensive operations. We shall proceed immediately. As the voting protocols initiated, Maris crossed the chamber floor to the human delegation. Up close, Reed was taller than she'd realized, nearly 2 meters of compact muscle and rigid posture. Oh, General Reed, she said quietly. I appreciate your offer, but the Averini delegate is not wrong. How can your fleet possibly stand against the Drakari when our own defenses failed so quickly? Something flickered behind Reed's eyes. A hardness, perhaps, or resolve. Ambassador Kale, there is much about humanity that the Conclave has yet to learn. We evolved on what you call a death world. That shapes a species in ways not immediately apparent. Meaning what exactly? Reed glanced toward the voting display where tallies were rapidly accumulating. Meaning that, when we joined the Conclave, we presented ourselves in a way that would be acceptable to the existing members. But make no mistake, Ambassador Earth has never been defenseless. Before Maris could press further, the moderator announced the results. By the narrowest of margins, the vote had passed. The Celestial Conclave formally requested Earth's intervention in the Krathari crisis, under Article 7. Ambassador Torres rose to officially accept the request, but it was Reed who caught Maris's eye once more. The general touched a small communicator on his wrist and spoke a single phrase that sent an inexplicable chill down her spine. "Command Actual, this is Reed. Execute Unshackle. Authorization Sierra Tango 07. Commence immediately." Aboard the Earth Central Command Station orbiting Mars, President Li Jiao stared at the holographic display with a mixture of concern and resignation. Around her, the Joint Chiefs of Defense sat in grim silence as the conclave's formal request for intervention hung in the air between them. "So it's come to this," she said finally, after 20 years of careful diplomacy. Admiral Celine Wu, commander of Earth's Combined Space Forces, leaned forward. "Madam President, we've always known this day might come. The Krathari are being slaughtered. This isn't just about diplomacy anymore." "I'm well aware, Admiral." President Lee's voice was sharp. "But we've maintained the facade of a limited defensive force for good reason. The moment we reveal our actual military capacity, everything changes. The Conclave will never look at us the same way again." General Thomas Reyes of Ground Operations folded his hands on the table. "With respect, that was inevitable. The Conclave species evolved on worlds with minimal environmental threats. They've never understood what it means to develop on a planet that's constantly trying to kill you." "The Deathworlder advantage," murmured Defense Secretary Alvarez. "We've kept it hidden to avoid frightening them, but now we have a choice," President Lee said. "Maintain our cover and allow the Krathari to fall, or reveal our true capabilities and save them knowing it forever alters our standing in galactic society." Admiral Wu's dark eyes narrowed. "Is it truly a choice, Madam President? We signed the Defense Accord in good faith. If we stand by while an entire civilization is destroyed, what does that make us?" The room fell silent again as President Lee studied the tactical display, showing Krathari space. Red markers indicated Drakari fleet positions advancing toward the capital world. Through limited long-range scanning, they had already confirmed at least 30 enemy capital ships and countless support vessels, a massive invasion force. "Reed has already initiated Unshackle," she noted. "He's not waiting for our deliberation. He's following standing orders," Admiral Wu replied. "If the Conclave formally requested aid, he was pre-authorized to begin mobilization, but the actual engagement requires your approval." President Lee closed her eyes briefly. 20 years of careful integration into the galactic community. 20 years of concealing humanity's true military might behind a veneer of modest defensive capability. All about to end. "Very well." Her voice was resolute as she opened her eyes. "Execute Operation Unshackle in its entirety. All fleets, all assets. Maximum deployment restricted rules of engagement. Civilian casualties are to be minimized at all costs." She stood straightening her formal uniform. "The Krathari asked for help. Let's show the galaxy exactly what it means when Deathworlders answer that call." Across human-controlled space, hidden installations rumbled to life. On Mars, massive hangar doors disguised as natural geological features slid open, revealing sleek, predatory warships that had never appeared in any registry shared with the Conclave. Within the asteroid belt, mining stations transformed, shedding their industrial facades to reveal military staging grounds where destroyer squadrons and fighter carriers had waited crewed and ready for decades. Beneath Europa's ice submarine docks, released stealth frigates into the dark waters before they ascended to space. In orbit around Neptune, cloud distortion fields powered down uncloaking dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything the Conclave races had constructed. The true face of humanity's defense force was emerging from shadow, and it was vast. On Luna Command, General Reed's executive officer, Colonel Maya Diaz, supervised the deployment. "Status report," she demanded, her fingers flying across holographic interfaces. "Third Fleet reports ready, all ships accounted for," reported a young lieutenant. "Stealth systems disengaged, weapons hot. The USS Ares has assumed flagship status. Fourth and Fifth Fleets transitioning from standby. Jump coordinates locked for Krathari space. Partisan drop pods loaded and awaiting deployment clearance. Ground forces at ready status." Colonel Diaz nodded sharply. Commence jump sequence. Priority targets are Drakari capital ships and any vessels engaged in planetary bombardment. Ground forces will deploy only after orbital superiority is secured. As orders echoed through command channels, she opened a private communication to General Reed, aboard the Aurora. Sir Unshackle is proceeding. All assets responding. We'll reach Krathari space within 6 hours. Reed's holographic image nodded. Good. I'm en route to the Airs now. The Conclave is processing the implications of our sudden fleet expansion. Ambassador Torres will handle the diplomatic fallout. And the Krathari. Ambassador Kale is accompanying me. Her knowledge of planetary defense systems will be crucial for coordination. Reed's expression hardened. The Drakari have never faced Earth forces before. They're about to learn why humanity's homeworld is classified as a death world, and why that matters. The transmission ended, leaving Colonel Diaz to oversee the largest military mobilization humanity had undertaken since joining the Conclave. Ships that had hidden in plain sight for 2 decades were now moving with purpose, their true power unveiled. It had begun. In the diplomatic wing of Aurora Station, Ambassador Kale paced anxiously, while General Reed prepared for departure. Through the viewport, she could see a single human vessel, the supposedly modest diplomatic courier that had transported the Earth delegation to the summit. "I don't understand," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "You speak of intervention, yet I see only one ship. My people are dying while we—" Her words died as the diplomatic courier suddenly changed. Its hull seemed to shimmer outer panels, sliding away to reveal weapon emplacements and additional thruster arrays. The vessel expanded, nearly doubling in apparent size, as hidden components emerged from concealed configurations. What is this?" she whispered. Reed checked his tactical display. "Stealth configuration disengaging. Standard protocol when shifting to combat operations." Maris stared at him, amber eyes wide. That ship was in disguise all this time. As were we all, in a manner of speaking. Reed's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "Ambassador, what you're witnessing is the actual face of Earth's military capability, something we've kept carefully hidden since joining the Conclave. But why the Accords require transparent disclosure of defensive capabilities, yes. And we disclosed exactly what the Accords required." Reed's smile was thin. "We simply didn't volunteer information about our full capacity. There's a difference." A chime from Reed's communicator interrupted them. "General, the Airs has arrived and is standing by in Sector 9. Ready to transport when you are." Maris blinked in confusion. The Airs. "There are no ships in Sector 9 except—" Her eyes widened as she turned back to the viewport. Where empty space had been, moments before a massive warship now hung against the stars. It had simply appeared, as if materializing from nothing. The vessel was unlike anything in the Conclave fleet, angular darkened hull, bristling with what were unmistakably weapon systems, its size dwarfing even the largest Krathari defense cruiser. Adaptive cloaking technology. Reed explained, gathering his data tablet. Combined with gravitational lensing, we've maintained a permanent defensive presence at every Conclave installation, since joining, for protection, of course. For protection, Maris repeated numbly. All member species agreed to entrust security to the Conclave peacekeepers. That was the foundation of our alliance. And how well has that protected your homeworld, Ambassador? Reed's voice was gentle, but unyielding. The Conclave peacekeeping fleet is designed for pirate interdiction and customs enforcement, not warfare. Against an enemy like the Drakari, such forces are insufficient. Maris had no answer for that. Instead, she watched as the massive warship, the Ars, apparently moved into docking position alongside the station. Its maneuvering was precise, almost graceful despite its size. "You're coming with me to the command ship," Reed continued. "We'll need your knowledge of Krathari defense systems and planetary geography if we're going to coordinate an effective counteroffensive." Counteroffensive, Maris found her voice again. The transmission suggested the capital has already fallen. What exactly do you hope to accomplish? Reed's expression hardened. The liberation of your planet, Ambassador. The Drakari may have started this conflict, but I assure you, Earth will finish it. As they proceeded toward the docking bay, Maris noticed the reactions of other diplomats and station personnel. Many pressed themselves against walls as Reed passed, eyes wide with alarm. The transformation was striking. Just hours ago, he had been viewed as a ceremonial attaché, a token military presence accompanying the real diplomats. Now, the barely concealed fear in the eyes of those they passed suggested everyone understood that something fundamental had changed. The Avarini delegation head blocked their path, his spindly frame vibrating with agitation. General Reed, the conclave demands an explanation for this. This deception, hidden warships, cloaked fleet elements. These are direct violations of... With respect, Ambassador, Reed interrupted. I am currently executing emergency defense protocols under Article 7, as authorized by majority vote. Any concerns about treaty interpretations can be addressed after the Krathari people are secure. But, additionally, Reed continued unrelenting. I would remind the Avarini delegation that your own species concealed the existence of your psionic abilities for 12 years after joining the conclave. Perhaps we could discuss mutual transparency at a more appropriate time. The Avarini delegate recoiled, as if struck, then silently moved aside. Maris glanced at Reed with newfound wariness as they continued toward the docking bay. You knew about their hidden abilities. Earth intelligence is thorough. Reed's face betrayed nothing. Every species guards certain advantages, Ambassador Kale. The difference is that humanity's advantages are now being deployed to save your people, not subjugate them. The docking bay doors parted to reveal a heavily armed reception party, human soldiers in matte black combat armor, that made them appear more machine than organic. Their helmets featured enhanced sensor arrays, and their weapons were unlike the ceremonial arms carried by conclave peacekeepers. These were tools designed for one purpose, only efficient warfare. As Maris and Reed approached the Rs, she found herself wondering what other secrets these humans had kept hidden, and whether the galaxy would ever be the same once they were all revealed. The command deck of the USS Ares hummed with controlled chaos as General Reed and Ambassador Kale arrived. Officers moved with practiced efficiency between stations, and the central holographic display showed fleet movements that stunned Maris into momentary silence. Not one fleet, but 3 were converging on Krathari space from different vectors. Hundreds of ships organized into battle groups, their designations scrolling past faster than she could read. These weren't hastily assembled defense forces. This was a military machine that had existed hidden, but ready for years. Reed strode to the command platform, where a woman with sharp features and the insignia of an admiral waited. Admiral Wu, Reed nodded in greeting. Status report. Advance elements are already in position on the edge of the Krathari system. Wu replied, her voice clipped and professional. Stealth frigates report 37 Drakari capital ships in orbit around Krathar Prime, with approximately 100 support vessels. They've established bombardment patterns over major population centers and have ground forces deployed in the capital and 3 secondary cities. Maris felt her scales tighten with dread. The death toll must be, significant but not total, Admiral Wu said with surprising gentleness. The Drakari appear to be following standard conquest protocol. Neutralize defense capabilities, decapitate government, then secure population centers for resource extraction. They're not engaged in genocide, Ambassador, at least not yet. Small comfort, Maris murmured. Reed studied the tactical display. What about civilian evacuations? Any signs? Minimal, Wu replied. Drakari have locked down all major spaceports. A few thousand civilians escaped in the initial chaos, but the rest are effectively trapped. Then our priority is clear. Reed expanded the holographic display, manipulating force deployments with practiced gestures. We need to regain orbital control first, Then secure landing zones for ground forces. Admiral, have the Lexington and Churchill battle groups maintain their stealth approach to these coordinates. He highlighted positions on opposite sides of the planet. The heirs will lead the frontal assault here, at the main Drakari anchorage point. Wu frowned. Direct engagement, our stealth and maneuverability advantages, will be most effective when the enemy is in disarray, Reed finished. They need to focus on the obvious threat before we spring the trap. Classic hammer and anvil, just executed in 3 dimensions. The Admiral nodded slowly. The partisan drop pods. Deploy on my signal after we've punched through their orbital screen. Primary targets are civilian evacuations and defense grid restoration. Maris watched this exchange with growing amazement. The humans spoke of engaging an overwhelming invasion force with the calm assurance of experienced predators. There was no panic, no desperate scrambling, just methodical planning for a swift, decisive strike. Ambassador Kale, Reed turned to her. I need everything you can tell us about Krathari defense systems, particularly any override codes that might reactivate automated platforms the Drakari have disabled. She blinked, forcing her mind to shift from shock to action. Yes, of course. The planetary grid uses quantum-encrypted channels. If any central nodes remain intact, I can provide authentication to bring secondary systems online remotely. Excellent. Work with Lieutenant Shao to integrate that into our assault plan. Reed nodded toward a young officer who stepped forward with a data terminal. As Maris moved to follow the lieutenant, Admiral Wu caught Reed's arm briefly. Connor, she said, voice lowered, but still audible to Maris's sensitive hearing. Joint Command is concerned about revealing too much of our technological edge in one engagement. The President specifically mentioned kinetic bombardment systems should be held in reserve if possible. Reed's expression hardened. The Drakari are bombing civilian population centers as we speak, Admiral. I will utilize every asset necessary to end this quickly and minimize Krathari casualties. If that means revealing capabilities, we'd prefer to keep secret. So be it. Wu held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. Understood. For what it's worth, I agree. I just needed to convey the message. Noted, Reed said, then raised his voice to address the command deck. All stations prepare for combat jump. Time to arrival at Krathar Prime. 4 hours 17 minutes at current acceleration, sir, came the prompt response. Make it 3 hours. Push the engines to combat maximum. Yes, sir. Maris felt the subtle shift as the massive dreadnought accelerated. Somewhere deep in the vessel engines that had remained dormant for years were now channeling power that defied her understanding of physics. She followed Lieutenant Shao to a workstation, her mind racing. In just 3 hours, the galaxy's balance of power would fundamentally change, and her people's fate hung in the balance. Back on Aurora Station, the Conclave emergency session had devolved into near chaos. Ambassador Torres of Earth stood calmly at the center of the storm, fielding accusations and demands for explanation from all sides. This is an unprecedented deception. The Volari representative's translation unit barely kept pace with his agitated hissing. For 20 cycles, Earth has maintained the pretense of limited military capability while concealing a massive war fleet. Torres nodded acknowledgement. Earth disclosed precisely what the accession protocols required: the existence and capabilities of our defensive forces. The fact that those forces were more extensive than generally understood was a matter of perspective, not deception. Semantics, sputtered the Averini delegate. Your perspective included cloaked warships in conclave space. For defensive purposes only, Torres countered smoothly. A precaution that, given current events, appears prescient rather than provocative. The moderator pulsed a bright violet, demanding order. The immediate concern is not Earth's disclosure practices, but the Krathari crisis. Ambassador Torres, what exactly is the scale of your military response? Torres's expression remained carefully neutral. 3 fleet battle groups are currently en route to Krathar Prime, with additional support elements on standby. General Reed commands from the dreadnought Ayers, with Ambassador Kale, providing consultation on Krathari defense systems. 3. Fleet battle groups. The Nidrani representative's translucent form pulsed with alarm. How many vessels does this entail? Classified, Torres replied simply, but sufficient to address the Drakari incursion decisively. The chamber fell momentarily silent as the implications sank in. For 2 decades, the conclave species had viewed humans as junior partners, somewhat primitive newcomers, with modest technology and limited military reach. The revelation of hidden fleet capacity, large enough to challenge the Drakari invasion force, without assistance from any other conclave member, was paradigm-shifting. "We must consider," began the moderator cautiously, "what this development means for conclave security protocols moving forward. If Earth has maintained hidden military assets of this magnitude, then Earth has proven itself more capable of safeguarding conclave interests than previously estimated," Torres finished smoothly. "I would suggest we focus on the immediate crisis. President Lee has authorized me to assure the conclave that Earth's intervention has one goal, only the liberation of Krathar Prime and the restoration of its legitimate government. And afterward," the Avarini delegate's voice carried poorly disguised fear, "what happens when your hidden fleets have demonstrated their power? Will Earth demand concessions, special status within the conclave?" Torres allowed herself a small smile. "Earth seeks only what it has always sought: peaceful cooperation and mutual defense. We have revealed military capacity not to threaten, but to protect. Judge us by our actions in the coming hours, not by your fears." As the debate continued, emergency channels suddenly activated. The holographic display flickered to life, showing new transmissions from Krathari space refugee ships that had escaped the initial assault, carrying thousands of civilians and whatever government officials had managed to evacuate. Among them was Diplomatic Minister Jarek's Ambassador Kale's direct superior. His scaled face showed signs of injury, but his voice was strong as he addressed the conclave. "Honorable representatives, I speak to you from the refugee vessel, Dawn Seeker. Our situation is grave. The Drakari assault was meticulously planned and executed without warning or provocation. Our planetary defense grid was compromised by what appears to be sabotage before the first ships appeared." The revelation sent new ripples of alarm through the chamber. "We have received word that Earth forces are en route to engage the invaders," Jarex continued. "While this intervention was unexpected in its scale, the Krathari Provisional Government officially welcomes and authorizes their military action under the Mutual Defense Accord." The moderator acknowledged this with a solemn pulse. "Minister Jarex, does your government have any intelligence on Drakari motivations for this unprecedented attack?" "Limited," Jarex admitted. "But interrogation of captured advanced scouts suggests their primary target is the core light repository beneath our capital. Our scientists have been researching ancient technology discovered in deep excavations technology that predates all known civilizations." This news silenced even the most vocal critics. The existence of precursor technology was rare, but documented across the galaxy remnants of civilizations that had risen and fallen millions of years before any current species achieved spaceflight. Such artifacts were strictly regulated by conclave protocols, with research conducted transparently and findings shared among all members. "The Drakari believe," Jarex continued grimly, "that the repository contains weapons technology, specifically something they refer to as the World Breaker. Our researchers found no evidence of weapons, but the Drakari seem convinced otherwise." Torres stepped forward. "Minister Jarex, this information is critical to our intervention planning. Can you transmit everything you have on this repository to General Reed immediately?" "Already done, Ambassador. We are cooperating fully with Earth Command." As the transmission ended, the mood in the chamber had shifted subtly. The revelation of hidden human military might was still shocking, but the specter of Drakari forces, seizing ancient superweapons, suddenly made Earth's intervention seem less threatening by comparison. Torres noted the change with satisfaction. Sometimes the truth properly timed was the best diplomatic weapon of all. Aboard the Airs now, less than an hour from Krathar Prime, Reed and his command staff reviewed the newly received intelligence about the core light repository. Reconfigure primary objectives, he ordered. The repository must be secured intact. If the Drakari are this determined to access it, we can't risk them extracting anything before we arrive. Admiral Wu nodded. I've assigned Commander Saul's stealth frigate group for immediate insertion once we establish orbital superiority. The Phantom and her sister ships can deploy special forces directly to the repository coordinates. Good, and the Krathari defense grid. Ambassador Kale looked up from her workstation. I've identified 7 major nodes that if reactivated could restore partial coverage to the capital region. Lieutenant Shao has programmed the authentication sequences into your ground team's equipment. Excellent work, Ambassador. Reed studied the tactical display, where Drakari positions continued to update, in real time transmitted by stealth scout drones that had slipped into the system hours ahead of the fleet. They've consolidated their forces into a defensive formation. They know we're coming. Impossible, Wu frowned. Our approach is fully stealthed. Even our engine signatures are masked. Not impossible, Reed corrected. They might not know our numbers or capabilities, but they certainly anticipated that the Conclave would respond somehow. And look here, he highlighted a pattern of ship movements. They're positioning to defend the capital region specifically. They're accelerating whatever they're doing at the repository. Maris stepped closer, studying the display. General, there's something not right about their deployment. The Drakari have positioned their heaviest vessels here, here, and here. She indicated 3 points, forming a triangle around the capital city. But the repository is located beneath this mountain range 15 kilometers to the north. Reed narrowed his eyes. They're creating a diversion. The visible fleet elements are drawing attention while something else happens elsewhere. Or they're expecting our approach from a specific vector and setting up a kill box, Wu suggested. Either way, we adjust. Reed's fingers danced across the interface, redrawing fleet positions. Admiral, have the Churchill group redirect to these coordinates. We'll maintain the planned frontal assault with the Airs, but I want Commander Saul's frigates to come in from beneath the ecliptic plane. Complete sensor blackout until they're within striking distance of the repository. Wu nodded sharply and began issuing orders. Around them, the command deck hummed with increasing intensity as final battle preparations were completed. Weapon systems powered up shield harmonics were calibrated for Drakari weapon signatures, and throughout the massive dreadnought crews secured for combat operations. Reed turned to Maris. Ambassador, I must ask you to move to the Secure Operations Center 2 decks below. It's hardened against any potential damage and will allow you to continue coordinating defense grid reactivation without being in the direct line of fire. She straightened, amber eyes flashing. With respect, General, I'll remain on the command deck. My people are fighting for their survival. I won't hide while others face danger on their behalf. For a moment, Reed studied her with an unreadable expression. Then, surprisingly, a small smile touched his lips. As you wish, Ambassador, but stay close to Lieutenant Shao's station and follow emergency protocols if ordered. Understood. Over the shipwide communication system, Reed's voice rang out, addressing all vessels in the approaching fleet. All hands, this is General Reed. In approximately 40 minutes, we will engage an enemy that has attacked our allies without provocation or warning. The Krathari people have asked for our help, and we will provide it decisively and completely. He paused, his eyes meeting Maris's across the command deck. For 20 years, humanity has been a peaceful member of the galactic community. Today, we remind the galaxy that peace is not the same as weakness. Today, we show the Drakari and anyone else who might consider similar aggression exactly what it means when Deathworlders go to war. Throughout the approaching fleet, human crews completed final preparations with the focused intensity of predators about to strike. The hammer was raised, the anvil positioned, And at the edge of Krathari space, the hidden might of Earth emerged from stealth weapons hot and on intercept course with the unsuspecting Drakari fleet. Warlord Sethar of the Drakari Dominion stood on the command platform of his flagship, the Inevitable Conquest, watching with satisfaction as his forces secured their hold on the Krathari capital. The primitive defense grid had fallen even more quickly than expected, and the planetary government had either been eliminated or scattered into ineffectual fragments. Status of the repository excavation. He demanded massive clawed hands clasped behind his armored back. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Vex, consulted a data terminal. Proceeding on schedule, Warlord. Our engineers report they have breached the third security layer. The central chamber should be accessible within 6 hours. Accelerate the timeline. Use whatever resources necessary. Yes, Warlord. Vex hesitated. There is another matter. Our long-range sensors detected unusual energy fluctuations at the system's edge approximately 2 hours ago. They dissipated before we could analyze them properly. Sethar turned his scaled ridge flaring with irritation. Could it be Conclave reinforcements? Unlikely, Warlord. The Conclave peacekeeping fleet has no vessels within 3 days' travel of this system. Their nearest significant force is currently deployed near the Volari homeworld. The humans, then? Vex made a dismissive gesture. Their known military assets are minimal, perhaps 20 patrol vessels of modest capability. Even if they diverted their entire fleet, they would pose no threat to our position. Sethar wasn't entirely convinced. During the planning stages of this operation, he had reviewed all available intelligence on Conclave species. The humans were newcomers admitted only 20 cycles ago, with limited territorial holdings and unremarkable technology. Yet something about them had always troubled him: their rapid adaptation to new environments, their excessive focus on defensive capabilities rather than expansion, their careful diplomatic positioning within the Conclave. Increase alert status regardless, he ordered, and deploy additional squadrons to these approach vectors. He indicated several likely trajectories on the tactical display. I want early warning of any vessels entering the system, no matter how insignificant. As you command. Vex moved to implement the orders, leaving Sethar to contemplate the holographic image of the capital city below. The Krathari were proving surprisingly resilient for such a soft species. Despite overwhelming force, pockets of resistance remained in the outlying districts. Nothing that threatened his control, of course, but an inconvenience nonetheless. Send another legion to the eastern quadrant, he instructed the ground forces coordinator. I want that resistance crushed by nightfall, and remind all commanders we need prisoners for labor. Unnecessary casualties reduce the value of our conquest. A sudden alarm blared across the command deck, causing Sethar to whirl toward the sensor officer's station. Report, he barked. Multiple contacts appearing at the system's edge. The officer's voice rose in disbelief. Massive energy signatures larger than anything in our recognition database. Show me. The tactical display shifted, zooming out to the outer system. Where empty space had existed moments before, dozens of contact markers were now appearing, their approach vectors converging on Krathar Prime. Impossible, Vex breathed, returning to Sethar's side. These readings suggest capital ships Dreadnought class or larger. The Conclave doesn't possess such vessels. Sethar's ridge flared fully, now a sign of both aggression and alarm. Identification. The sensor officer worked frantically. Signatures match. Human designs, Warlord. But these are not the patrol craft documented in our intelligence files. These are warships, true warships. For the first time since the invasion began, Sethar felt a flicker of uncertainty. How many? Still counting, Warlord. At least 70 major vessels with smaller craft numbering in the hundreds. 70, Vex sputtered. The entire human fleet was supposed to be 20 ships at maximum. Sethar's mind raced. Had their intelligence been so catastrophically wrong, or had the humans deliberately concealed their true military capacity? Either possibility was troubling and potentially fatal, if not addressed immediately. Battle stations. He ordered, voice deadly calm. Recall all ships to defensive positions around the capital. Prepare for orbital engagement. The ground forces warlord. Maintain pressure on the repository excavation but consolidate all other teams to defensive positions. If these humans mean to challenge us, they'll find the Drakari Dominion is not so easily defeated. As his crew scrambled to implement his orders, Sethar studied the approaching enemy with growing concern. The vessels moved with coordinated precision that spoke of extensive combat experience, something the humans supposedly lacked. More troubling still, several of the largest signatures were now simply vanishing from sensors, as if they could control their very detectability. "Send a priority transmission to the High Command," he ordered. "Inform them that the human threat has been severely underestimated and request immediate reinforcements." Even as he spoke, Sethar knew such reinforcements would arrive too late. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine not just the fate of this conquest, but potentially the future of Drakari expansion into Conclave space. For the first time in his long, bloody career, Warlord Sethar felt the cold touch of fear. On the command deck of the Ares, General, Reed watched as the Drakari fleet scrambled to respond to humanity's sudden appearance. Their ships were abandoning patrol patterns, consolidating into defensive formations around the capital, exactly as predicted. "They've spotted us," Admiral Wu confirmed. "Sensor logs show they've detected our primary battle group, but not Commander Saul's stealth frigates, or the Churchill group coming in from beneath the ecliptic." "Good. Maintain frontal approach with the heirs and escorts. Let's keep their attention fixed while our other elements move into position." Reed turned to the weapons officer. "Status of kinetic delivery systems." "Hypervelocity rods primed and targeted, sir. First salvo ready on your command." Reed nodded. "Designate primary targets their command vessels and heavy bombardment platforms. Priority to any ship currently engaged in planetary bombardment." Ambassador Kale watched this exchange with fascination. The humans spoke of unleashing devastating weaponry with the same calm efficiency they might discuss maintenance schedules. There was no bloodlust, no vengeful rhetoric, just the methodical execution of military objectives. "General," she ventured, "what exactly are these hypervelocity rods?" Reed glanced at her. "A relatively simple weapon, actually. Tungsten carbide cylinders accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. No explosive payload necessary at that velocity. Kinetic energy alone creates the equivalent of a tactical nuclear strike, but without radiation concerns." Maris blinked. "You're firing metal sticks at them." A ghost of a smile touched Reed's lips. "Essentially, yes. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. The Drakari shields are designed to disperse energy weapons, physical projectiles moving faster than their tracking systems can register. Well, that's a different problem entirely." Before she could respond, Lieutenant Shao called out, "Sir, Drakari vessels are powering weapons. They've established firing solutions on our approach vector." "As expected. Defensive screens to maximum. Prepare to execute evasive pattern delta on my mark." Reed's voice remained calm as he returned his attention to the tactical display. "Time to optimum firing range. 4 minutes, 17 seconds, sir." Reed opened a fleet-wide channel. "All vessels weapons free upon entering optimum range. Prioritize targets as designated. Commander Saul, you are cleared to proceed with repository insertion on schedule." Acknowledgements echoed back from across the fleet. On screen, the distance to the Drakari defensive formation continued to shrink rapidly. Maris found herself holding her breath as the moment of engagement approached. 3 minutes to range," called the tactical officer. Drakari vessels launching fighter screens. "As expected," Reed nodded. "Deploy our countermeasures." From the flanks of the human battle group, smaller vessels suddenly accelerated forward, releasing clouds of what appeared to be metallic dust that expanded into a glittering wall between the approaching forces. "What is that?" Maris asked. "Nanochaff," explained Lieutenant Shao from her station. "Smart particles that seek and attach to enemy fighter craft, disrupting their guidance systems and communication arrays. On screen, the advancing Drakari fighters began to falter as they entered the chaff cloud, their formations breaking apart as systems failed across their squadrons. 2 minutes to range. Drakari capital ships adjusting formation, reported the tactical officer. They're concentrating fire solutions on the airs, detecting energy buildup consistent with their primary weapon systems. They've identified us as the flagship, Reed noted. Good. Admiral Wu signal the Thermopylae and Shiva to execute flanking pattern now. 2 heavy cruisers that had been tucked close to the air's shadow suddenly broke formation, accelerating on divergent vectors that would bring them around the edges of the Drakari line. 1 minute to range. Reed's voice remained steady as he issued the command that would initiate humanity's first major interstellar battle. All vessels prepare main batteries. Fire on my mark. Maximum dispersion pattern. The seconds ticked down. On the tactical display, the human and Drakari fleets converged like the jaws of some massive predator. Firing range achieved, announced the weapons officer. Reed's eyes narrowed. Mark. Across the human fleet, weapon ports that had remained dormant for decades opened simultaneously. From the airs alone, dozens of hypervelocity projectiles launched in perfect sequence, accelerating to speeds that made them nearly invisible to the naked eye. The effect was both beautiful and horrifying. As the tungsten rods struck their targets, Drakari vessels simply ceased to exist. No dramatic explosions, no gradual destruction, just catastrophic structural failure as kinetic energy transferred through hulls never designed to withstand such impacts. 5 Drakari capital ships were reduced to expanding debris fields in the first salvo. 7 more suffered critical damage, tumbling out of formation with massive hull breaches. Only their outer defensive screens had prevented complete destruction. For a moment, the Drakari response faltered as their commanders attempted to process the unprecedented devastation. Then, with commendable discipline, they regrouped, bringing secondary weapons to bear while adjusting shield harmonics. They're adapting, noted Admiral Wu. Second salvo will be less effective now that they understand the threat profile. Then we change the profile, Reed replied. Signal all vessels to switch to conventional energy weapons distributed firing pattern. Keep them guessing while Commander Saul's team approaches the repository. As the frontal engagement intensified, Maris watched the tactical display, where a small cluster of stealth frigates was approaching the planet from an entirely different vector, completely undetected by the distracted Drakari fleet. The battle for Crather Prime had begun in earnest. And if this initial exchange was any indication, the Drakari were about to learn a harsh lesson about challenging a species forged on a death world. Commander Arik Sol's stealth frigate, the USS Phantom, sliced through Crathari atmosphere, its advanced cloaking systems, rendering it invisible to Drakari sensors, focused on the massive space battle above. Behind it, 5 sister ships followed in tight formation, each carrying a complement of Earth's most elite special forces, partisans they called themselves. Approaching drop coordinates, reported his navigator. Repository entrance is 2 kilometers ahead, currently under Drakari control, with approximately 50 troops visible on surface scans. Saul nodded, dark eyes fixed on the tactical display. Any sign they've detected our approach? Negative, Commander. Their attention remains fixed on the orbital engagement. Good. Sewell opened the secure channel to his strike teams. Partisan units prepare for deployment. Rules of engagement are as follows. Secure the repository entrance, neutralize Drakari forces, and establish a defensive perimeter. Crathari civilians are to be evacuated if present. The facility itself must remain intact. Repeat, the repository cannot sustain significant damage. Acknowledgements came back from team leaders as the special forces made final preparations in the deployment bays below. These were humanity's elite warriors, men and women who had trained extensively for extraterrestrial combat operations, their bodies enhanced with subdural armor weaves and neural accelerators that pushed the boundaries of human capability. Unlike the ceremonial guards who accompanied diplomatic missions, these soldiers represented the true face of Earth's military power, adaptable, relentless, and unnervingly efficient. Initiating deployment sequence. Saul ordered as the frigates reached their designated positions, hovering silently above the repository entrance, where Drakari forces labored to breach the ancient facility's final defenses. From each vessel, cylindrical pods dropped in perfect synchronization, their descent masked by the same stealth technology that concealed the ships. Each pod contained 6 partisans, in full tactical gear soldiers, who had spent their entire careers preparing for the moment when humanity would need to reveal its true strength. The pods struck with precision, impacting in a circular pattern around the repository entrance. Their outer shells blew outward in controlled detonations, immediately deploying energy barriers that would shield the emerging troops from enemy fire. The Drakari guards barely had time to register the sudden intrusion before the partisans were upon them, moving with speed that belied their heavily armored forms. Precision weapons fire cut down the outer perimeter in seconds, while specialized EMP grenades disabled the excavation equipment. From the Phantom's command deck, Saul watched the operation unfold through multiple feeds, linked to his soldiers' helmet cameras. The engagement was proceeding exactly as simulated, the partisans establishing control zones with minimal wasted movement, their tactics clearly bewildering the Drakari, who had never faced human combat forces before. Central Team reports they've reached the main entrance, his communications officer reported. Drakari forces are retreating deeper into the facility. Tell them to secure the entrance, but do not pursue yet, Saul ordered. We need a complete scan of the interior before proceeding further. Ambassador Kale indicated there could be automated defense systems that would trigger against any unauthorized entry. As the ground teams consolidated their position, Saul's attention shifted to the secondary objective. Status on the defense grid nodes. Teams Bravo and Echo have reached the primary generator complex. They're beginning the reactivation sequence using Ambassador Kale's authentication codes. Saul nodded with satisfaction. If they could bring even a portion of the planetary defense grid back online, it would significantly aid their overall mission and demonstrate to the Krathari that Earth's intervention was about restoration, not just destruction. Commander! His sensor officer called suddenly, detecting Drakari dropships inbound from the capital, at least 20 heavily armed. They must have diverted reinforcements from the urban operations. Saul studied the tactical display. The incoming Drakari forces significantly outnumbered his ground teams, but numbers alone didn't concern him. What troubled him was the possibility of being forced into a protracted engagement that might damage the repository itself. Signal the heirs, he decided. Request targeted kinetic strikes on the Drakari approach vectors, minimum safe distance from our position. Yes, sir. As the order transmitted, Saul returned his attention to the repository entrance, where his teams had established a defensive perimeter. The initial phase had gone perfectly, but experience had taught him that first contact was often the easiest part of any operation. The real challenge would come when the Drakari recovered from their surprise and brought their full remaining strength to bear. In orbit above that challenge was already unfolding. The space around Krathar Prime had transformed into a 3-dimensional chessboard of devastating complexity. After the initial shock of the human kinetic bombardment, the Drakari fleet had recovered with impressive speed, adapting their tactics to the unexpected threat. Aboard the Heirs General, Reed monitored the evolving battle with intense focus. The Drakari had split their remaining capital ships into 3 battle groups, attempting to encircle the human forces, while smaller, faster vessels darted through the formation, looking for vulnerabilities. They're competent. Admiral Wu noted a professional assessment rather than concern. Adapting rapidly to our attack patterns. Reed nodded. As expected from a warrior culture. But adaptation isn't enough when facing a technological gap this significant. The tactical display updated as Commander Sol's request for orbital fire support came through. Reed studied the Drakari dropship trajectories and made a quick decision. Authorize kinetic strike package minimum yield coordinates, as specified. And signal the Churchill group. It's time to close the trap. Wu relayed the orders, and seconds later, precision strikes from the airs annihilated the Drakari reinforcements, heading toward the repository. Simultaneously, the previously hidden Churchill battle group emerged from stealth on the far side of the planet, catching the Drakari rear elements completely by surprise. Status of partisan ground forces, Reed asked. Commander Saul reports the repository entrance secured. Defense grid reactivation is proceeding at 2 primary nodes. Estimated 30 minutes until partial coverage restored. And the Drakari leadership? Still aboard their flagship, the inevitable Conquest. Wu highlighted the massive vessel at the center of the Drakari formation. They've reinforced their defenses after observing our kinetic weaponry, multiple redundant shield layers, and they're maintaining erratic movement patterns to complicate targeting solutions. Reed studied the enemy flagship with narrowed eyes. Warlord Sethar was proving a worthy opponent, adapting quickly, refusing to panic despite the unexpected onslaught. Taking him alive would be preferable both for intelligence purposes and to facilitate the Drakari withdrawal once their position became untenable. Designate the flagship as priority target. I want precision strikes on their propulsion systems, and weapons arrays only disable, don't destroy. Yes, sir. As the battle continued, Ambassador Kale approached Reed's command station, her expression troubled. General, I've been monitoring communications from the surface. There are still thousands of civilians trapped in the capital city, with Drakari forces using them as living shields around key installations. Reed's jaw tightened. Hostage tactics, barbaric but effective. Can your troops help them? We'll do more than help them, Ambassador. Reed turned to Wu. Status of partisan reserve units. Ready for deployment, sir. Drop pods prepped and loaded. Initiate secondary deployment phase urban extraction protocols. Priority to civilian evacuation centers and medical facilities. Reed's expression hardened. And inform all team leaders any Drakari forces threatening civilians are to be neutralized with extreme prejudice. As the orders transmitted, the tactical display updated with dozens of new trajectory plots. Partisan drop pods redirecting toward the capital city and other major population centers. Unlike the conventional urban warfare tactics, the Drakari would expect these specialized teams had trained extensively for civilian extraction operations on alien worlds. Will it be enough? Maris asked quietly. Reed met her gaze directly. Ambassador, I promised your people would be liberated. That wasn't diplomatic rhetoric, it was a military objective. Before this day ends, the Drakari will understand exactly what that means. On the surface of Krathar Prime chaos reigned in the capital city. Drakari occupation forces, suddenly aware that their orbital support was engaged in desperate battle, began implementing contingency protocols, destroying key infrastructure, fortifying government buildings, and gathering civilian hostages at strategic locations. Through the scattered resistance networks that had formed since the invasion, word spread rapidly. Help had arrived. The humans, those quiet newcomers to the conclave, had come with unexpected might to challenge the Drakari oppressors. For many, Krathari, the news was met with cautious hope. For the Drakari ground commanders, it triggered increasingly desperate measures. In the central plaza, near what had once been the elegant spires of the Krathari council chambers, a Drakari commander named Thosk supervised the establishment of defensive positions. Around him, terrified civilians huddled in makeshift containment fields, hostages to deter any direct assault. Strengthen the perimeter, he ordered his subordinates. Set demolition charges at all approach routes. If the humans attempt ground insertion, they'll pay in blood, theirs and the hostages. His second-in-command, a battle-scarred veteran, scanned the skies nervously. Commander, our orbital support is fragmenting. Communications with the flagship are intermittent at best. Perhaps we should consider withdrawal to... Withdrawal, Thosk snarled. The Dominion does not retreat. We hold this position until relieved, or until every one of us has fallen. That is the Drakari way. Before his subordinate could respond, a series of distant thuds echoed across the city impact sounds, but not from conventional bombardment. Thosk activated his tactical display, scanning for the source. Multiple impacts detected in sectors 7, 12, and 15, reported his sensor operator. Pattern consistent with troop deployment pods. Thosk bared his teeth in anticipation. So, they come for direct engagement. Prepare all units for ground combat. Activate the hostage protocols. Any approach within 100 meters results in civilian casualties. He was still issuing orders when the first partisan team struck, not from the ground as expected, but from above. Human soldiers in dark armor descended on nearly invisible suspension lines, their approach masked by both technology and the swirling dust storms kicked up by the ongoing battle. The Drakari perimeter guards barely had time to raise their weapons before precision fire cut them down. Not wild suppression tactics, but surgically placed shots that neutralized threats without endangering the civilian hostages. Thosk roared in fury, activating his personal shield and drawing his ceremonial blade, a weapon that had tasted blood on a dozen conquered worlds. Stand firm. Show these human interlopers the courage of the Dominion. His rallying cry was cut short as a single projectile passed through his shield harmonics, as if they didn't exist, striking him precisely at the base of his skull. He collapsed without another sound, his nervous system shut down by the specialized ammunition designed specifically for Drakari physiology. Across the city, similar scenes unfolded as partisan teams systematically eliminated Drakari command elements while securing civilian evacuation routes. Unlike conventional military forces, these soldiers moved with disturbing efficiency, each action precise, each target neutralized with minimal collateral impact. The Krathari civilians, initially terrified by the sudden assault, quickly realized the humans were fighting to free them, not simply exchanging one conqueror for another. As containment fields deactivated and evacuation corridors opened, thousands began moving toward designated safe zones where medical teams waited. Back in orbit, the space battle had reached its crescendo. The human fleet now fully encircled the remaining Drakari vessels, their technological superiority evident in the wreckage floating among the combatants. Warlord Sethar's flagship, the Inevitable Conquest, limped at the center of a shrinking defensive formation, its primary propulsion destroyed weapon systems failing one by one. On the Auri's command deck, General Reed received the update with grim satisfaction. Status of ground operations. Proceeding ahead of schedule, sir, reported Lieutenant Shao. 70% of the capital now secured. Civilian evacuation routes established and functioning. Commander Saul reports the repository has been fully secured, with Drakari excavation equipment neutralized. And the fleet? Admiral Wu gestured to the tactical display. The Drakari have lost 32 capital ships and approximately 80 support vessels. Their remaining forces are concentrated around the flagship in a last-stand formation. We've disabled their propulsion and primary weapons as ordered. Reed nodded. Open a communication channel to Warlord Sethar. After a moment's delay, the main screen activated, showing the Drakari commander. Despite his desperate situation, Sethar maintained an imposing presence, his scaled ridge fully extended, in defiance eyes burning with hatred. Warlord Sethar. Reed began, his voice calm but unyielding. Your position is untenable. Your ground forces are being systematically neutralized, and your fleet is destroyed or disabled. I offer you one opportunity to surrender. Order your remaining forces to stand down, and we will guarantee fair treatment under Conclave protocols for prisoners of war. Sethar's laugh was harsh. Surrender to a species that hid behind false weakness for 20 cycles. Your deception may have granted you temporary advantage, human, but the Dominion is vast. What happens here today is merely the opening movement in a longer conflict. There will be no longer conflict, Warlord, Reed replied evenly. Not with the Krathari, not with any Conclave species. This demonstration of Earth's military capability was not intended as a prelude to war, but as its prevention. Fine words from a victor. Sethar's eyes narrowed. What are your terms? Complete withdrawal of all Drakari forces from Krathari space. Return of all prisoners. Reparations to be determined by conclave arbitration. And if I refuse? Reed's expression remained unchanged. Then, we will be forced to eliminate your remaining forces, down to the last ship, the last soldier. The choice between a costly defeat and complete annihilation is yours to make, Warlord. For a long moment, Sethar said nothing, his alien features unreadable to human eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new tone. Not fear, but something approaching respect. Your species is more formidable than our intelligence suggested, General Reed. Perhaps that is why you concealed your true nature for so long. He straightened a gesture of formal acknowledgement. I will order my forces to stand down. The Dominion knows when a battle is lost, this day belongs to Earth. This day belongs to Peace, Warlord. Remember that when you report to your superiors. As the transmission ended, Reed turned to find Ambassador Kale watching him, with an expression he couldn't quite interpret, something between awe and wariness. You did it, she said quietly. In hours you accomplished what the entire Conclave peacekeeping fleet couldn't have done in months, if at all. Reed nodded, but there was no triumph in his face, only grim satisfaction at a necessary task completed. The real work begins now, Ambassador. Liberating your world was the straightforward part. Rebuilding trust, both yours in us and the conclaves in Earth, that will be the greater challenge. As Krathar Prime slowly rotated below them, the planet's defense grid began reactivating section by section, symbolic of a civilization beginning its recovery, forever changed by the knowledge that the quiet humans had been something more all along. 3 days after the Battle of Shadow's Gate, as it was already being called, in Conclave Communications, an emergency session convened aboard Aurora Station. Representatives from all member species gathered in the central chamber, the atmosphere thick with tension and unanswered questions. General Reed sat beside Ambassador Torres in the human delegation, his formal uniform now adorned with a new medal, the Krathari Star of Liberation personally bestowed by the restored government. Across the chamber, Ambassador Kale represented her people, her scales gleaming with renewed vitality, now that her homeworld was secure. The moderator called the session to order, bioluminescence pulsing in formal patterns. This extraordinary gathering addresses recent events in Krathari space and their implications for conclave security protocols. Ambassador Kale will provide the initial briefing. Maris rose, her posture straight and proud. Honorable representatives, 3 days ago my world faced extinction at the hands of Drakari invaders. Today, our cities are secure, our government restored, and our people free once more. She paused, her amber eyes finding Reed across the chamber. This miracle was made possible through the direct intervention of Earth forces, whose decisive action saved countless Krathari lives. Murmurs rippled through the assembly, not all of them approving. While gratitude is appropriate, the Avarini delegate interjected, we cannot ignore the troubling revelations about Earth's concealed military capabilities. For 20 cycles, they maintained the pretense of limited defensive assets, while harboring a massive war fleet capable of defeating the region's most formidable military power in mere hours. We concealed nothing that the accession protocols did not require us to disclose, Ambassador Torres countered smoothly. Earth has always maintained defensive capabilities proportionate to potential threats. The fact that those capabilities exceeded general expectations is hardly a diplomatic crisis. It is precisely a diplomatic crisis. The Valari representative's translator barely kept pace with his agitated hissing. The mutual trust upon which this conclave was founded has been undermined. How can we maintain peaceful relations when one member possesses hidden power of this magnitude? The chamber fell silent as General Reed stood, his movement deliberate and controlled. Unlike the political dance of the diplomats, his approach was direct. Representatives of the conclave, I understand your concerns. From your perspective, Earth has revealed itself as something unexpected, a military power that chose restraint instead of dominance. He surveyed the chamber, meeting the eyes of each delegation. But consider the alternative. Had we arrived in conclave space 20 years ago displaying our full military capability, how would you have received us, with trust or with fear? No one answered, but the uncomfortable shifting of several delegates spoke volumes. We chose integration over intimidation, Reed continued. We chose to be judged by our actions and principles, rather than by the weapons we could bring to bear. And when called upon to defend a conclave member under Article 7, we did so with precision and restraint. He gestured toward the tactical displays now showing the liberated Krathari capital. Our forces neutralized the Drakari invasion, while minimizing civilian casualties and infrastructure damage. We secured the core light repository intact, preventing potentially catastrophic consequences, had the Drakari accessed whatever they believed was hidden there. And when victory was achieved, we did not occupy, we did not demand concessions. We began immediate withdrawal to allow Krathari self-determination. The moderator pulsed acknowledgement. These facts are not in dispute, General. The concern lies in the precedent. If Earth maintains such significant hidden capabilities, what assurance do we have that other members are not doing the same? Perhaps that is the wrong question, Ambassador Kale interjected, rising once more. Perhaps instead we should ask, what assurance do we have that external threats like the Drakari will not strike again? The Conclave peacekeeping forces proved inadequate against determined aggression. Without Earth's intervention, my civilization would now be enslaved or destroyed. She moved to the center of the chamber, her voice gaining strength. I propose a new framework, a defense compact that allows for rapid response to aggression against any member, utilizing the unique capabilities each species brings to our collective security. Earth has demonstrated both the power to defend and the wisdom to restrain that power. Who better to help us forge this new path? The proposal sent fresh ripples of discussion through the chamber. After 2 decades of relative peace, the Drakari attack had exposed the vulnerabilities in the Conclave's defensive posture. The humans, initially viewed with caution due to their Deathworld origins, had proven themselves not conquerors, but protectors. After hours of debate, the moderator called for a preliminary vote on Kale's proposal. To Reed's surprise, it passed with significant majority, only the Avarini delegation and a fraction of the Volari representatives opposing. It seems, said Ambassador Torres quietly, as the session adjourned, that nothing builds trust quite like saving a civilization from annihilation. Reed's expression remained thoughtful. Trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets, Ambassador. We've earned some drops, but there's a long way to go. As delegates dispersed to their respective quarters, Maris Kale approached the human contingent. General Reed, the provisional government has requested your presence on Krathar Prime for the formal restoration ceremony. They wish to honor Earth's contribution personally. Reed nodded. I would be honored, Ambassador. May I ask you something? Maris's voice lowered. Something that has troubled me since watching your fleet in action. Of course. Your ships, your weapons, your tactics, they were not designed specifically for the Drakari. Everything I witnessed suggested capabilities developed and refined over considerable time. Her amber eyes studied him intently. Who were you preparing to fight all these years, General? What enemy necessitated such formidable preparation? Reed was silent for a long moment, weighing his response carefully. Finally, he looked not at Maris, but out the viewport where stars gleamed against the void. The universe is vast, Ambassador Kale. Humanity evolved on a world that taught us harsh lessons about survival lessons, written in blood across thousands of generations. When we reached the stars, we carried those lessons with us. His eyes returned to hers. We didn't build our fleets for any specific enemy. We built them because our history taught us that peace is precious, precisely because it is fragile. And now, with your true strength revealed, now we adapt as we always have. Reed's expression softened slightly. But this time we adapt together with our allies. The defense compact your people proposed, that is the path forward. Not human protection alone, but mutual defense drawing on each species' unique strengths. As they spoke, a transmission arrived from Krathar Prime Images of the capital, where reconstruction was already underway. Human engineering teams worked alongside Krathari specialists, repairing damage from the invasion. In what had once been a battlefield, children played in newly secured parks, watched over by a mixed patrol of human partisans and restored Krathari guards. Reed studied the images, his expression unreadable. The revelation of Earth's hidden might had forever changed humanity's place in the conclave. The careful diplomacy of 2 decades had given way to a new reality, one where the Deathworlders were revealed, not as the threat many had quietly feared, but as the shield few had imagined possible. The dual burden of power now lay clearly upon human shoulders, the strength to defend, and the wisdom to know when and how to use that strength. As Reed watched Krathari children play beneath the watchful eyes of his soldiers, he understood that this was just the beginning. The galaxy had called for help, and the Deathworlders had answered. What came next would define not just humanity's place among the stars, but the very future of interspecies cooperation in a universe where threats would always exist, and where the lessons of Earth's evolutionary crucible might yet save countless civilizations from extinction. In the shadow of victory, Reed allowed himself a moment of hope. Perhaps this was why humanity had endured its harsh birthplace, not merely to survive, but ultimately to protect. The Deathworlders had unleashed their fleet, and in doing so had discovered their purpose.